The human princess refused evacuation. Her decision changed the battle. The morning light over Urandor was pale and thin, as if the planet itself held its breath. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, catching the glint of distant suns, and for a moment the city of Lyrian looked calm and ordinary. Market stalls opened their shutters. Street sweepers cleared the dust. Children chased each other around fountain steps and laughed with the careless sound of people who thought the world would stay as it had always been. Far beyond the city, on high cliffs and in deep bunkers, men and women in uniform did not laugh. They watched the horizon and prepared for a storm. The warning came like a bell tolling in a quiet town. A relay from the fleet declared an enemy armada moving into the system. The sensors had seen the shapes first as specks, then as patterns that could not be ignored. The council in the capital met at once. They were a mix of old commanders with scarred faces and new advisors with fresh uniforms, all speaking in the sharp language of urgency. Evacuation orders were drawn up, every citizen's name counted and scheduled. Ships were called to the docks, routes were planned. The goal was simple: move non-combatants to safety, save lives, and keep the fighting forces free to buy time. Among the names on the evacuation list was Princess Alara. She was young, older than many of the cadets who marched through the palace courtyards, but younger than most of the generals. People in Lyrian had watched her grow. She learned quickly, listened carefully to those who had lived through harder days, and sometimes surprised them with questions that showed more thought than most expected. Her mother had taught her to rule with mercy. Her tutors had taught her history, languages, and strategy. Still, those who knew her best said she had a stubborn streak that came from somewhere deep and private. It showed most clearly now. A carriage waited at the palace gate. The royal guards had formed a path. Envoys from the fleet stood behind them with folded maps and stern faces. They said there was no time for debate. Alara's presence in the capital made evacuation slower. Enemies could target the royal convoy and create chaos. A single strike could scatter the lines and trap thousands. The commanders had seen it happen in other systems. Protocols existed to prevent panic. Protocols were built on the hard lessons of defeat and loss. The order was clear: the princess must leave. They expected Alara to step into the carriage without fuss. They expected a short speech thanking the troops and promising to support them from safety. They expected her to obey the plan that protected the many by sheltering the few. Instead, she stood in the doorway and looked down at the streets. She had seen the troops more than once. She had walked among them in training fields disguised as a guest, and she had watched a dozen young faces age in the space of a single campaign season. She had listened to mothers who worried about sons and fathers who confessed fears they would not give voice to. The princess did not want to be wrapped in silk and hidden while the people she loved fought and bled. She believed that a leader had to share the danger of those she led. It was a belief that made some smile and others clench their hands. "Your Highness," General Verk said, voice low but urgent. He was a man whose hair had silvered at the temples and whose eyes had seen more nights than his years would justify. He had fought for this planet twice before and had earned the respect of soldiers who trusted his steady hand. "We must leave. This is our plan. If you stay, you put everyone at risk." Alara folded the map he offered back into its neat rectangle and placed it on a brass table. Her fingers did not tremble. She replied with a calm voice that surprised even her advisors. "People need a reason to stand when everything tells them to fall back," she said. "If I go, they will see their leaders leaving. I will not be the cause of that fear." There were shouts and arguments. Some aides began to list sensible alternatives: temporary relocation to a fortress far inland, a small guard detail to escort her to safety, a promise to return when the danger had passed. A minister spoke of duty and the trust of allies who would watch how the evacuation was managed. But Alara listened, and when she spoke again, it was not to argue strategy. She told a memory of a village in the north where an old teacher had once told her that courage was a small light held steady in a storm. A light can be blown out, she said, but if every person holds one, the darkness cannot win. Her words did not change everyone's mind. That was not how words always worked, yet they held weight. The palace halls were full of portraits of leaders who had chosen safety and lived. No lesson in history always pointed to the same answer. Some practices were born from hard logic, others from the messy heart of what it meant to belong to a people. Alara's choice created a new line on the map of duty, and not all the commanders liked it. The city prepared itself in the way a city must in war. Sirens wailed in distant districts. Citizens gathered their few valuables, bundled children into arms, and boarded shuttle lines that moved like rivers. Soldiers took up positions on roof lines and behind barricades. The sky itself seemed to darken as ships from the defending fleet assembled in orbit, engines humming in a low threat like a steely animal ready to pounce. Men and women signed up for whatever task they were given: repair, watch, carry. Some carried the look of people who walked toward what might be the end and refused to think of anything else. Princess Alara went to the front where the best recruits were assembling. She did not wear the ornate robes of her station. Instead, she put on a lighter uniform, a cloak that could hide no secrets and no rank. Citizens who recognized her softened and then straightened, as if seeing her among them gave them courage. She walked along the lines, placing her hand on a shoulder, speaking briefly to a captain who had fought under Verk for 10 years, laughing with a young cadet who admitted to being terrified. She did not speak long. She did not give grand speeches. She moved through the camp like someone checking to see whether the people she loved were sleeping or awake. News of her presence spread quickly. Where once the royal household had been an image only seen in portraits and formal celebrations, the princess now stood in mud and dust and metal, and people felt the change in the world. Soldiers who had been watching their boots began to look up. The youngest among them, who had never known a leader by example, seemed to stand a little taller. Older soldiers exchanged looks that carried the meaning of hard memory. Sometimes a small personal risk from a leader could change the heart of a man who had lost hope. Not everyone approved. A coalition envoy, his uniform stitched with the colors of an allied fleet, took Alara aside and warned her of political consequences. "If you are captured," he said bluntly, "your people will be a bargaining chip. Your death or living will be used by the enemy. Leaving is safer. It protects the state." Alara looked at him with a steady gaze. "If people feel we have traded their lives for the false safety of one life, what have we saved?" she asked. She was not reckless. She understood realpolitik. She also believed, absolutely, that sometimes what a leader saves is not only the body of the nation, but the spirit. A people who saw their ruler stand with them could find the courage to stand with each other. As the alien fleet drew near, the first attacks began. They were not the loud, blazing arrivals of stories. They came in silence first, a humming spike on the sensors, a flash on a distant scanner, then the trembling of the ground as missiles found open space beyond the city. Buildings lost sections of their faces like teeth knocked loose. Fires took hold and threw orange light against the clouds. Ships in orbit returned fire with beams and explosions that made the heavens look torn. The noise grew like a wave, and the city's calm was replaced by the sharp, focused work of people who had been preparing for this day. Alara took her station within a command tent that smelled of heated metal and old coffee. Around her were maps and screens, dashed lines and blinking icons. She watched soldiers move like chess pieces and absorbed reports with a mind that pulled together small, sharp facts into larger patterns. She did not offer orders unless asked. She listened to the captains, and then, at moments when an idea rose clear in her mind, she suggested a move. It was not arrogance but observation. She had studied the geography of Urandor, the pattern of its canyons, the way wind and dust could hide a formation. She spoke in short sentences, simple and clear, and the officers listened because their ears were hungry for any edge. The first real battle happened in the Badlands, a stretch of jagged rock and shallow valleys that gave the defenders pockets of cover and the attackers long, exposed approaches. The enemy used long-range weaponry to shape the battlefield, trying to force humans into positions where their ships could finish them. The generals had planned a retreat to a stronger ridge. They calculated losses and decided that withdrawal would save more lives. Alara saw then how that calculation could be understood differently by those on the ground who saw their neighbors fall. "Hold," she said, soft enough that only Captain Rin heard at first. Rin had lost an arm in an earlier skirmish and kept his voice low like a ruined bell. He looked at her and saw the resolve there. "We will make them think the retreat is real," she added, and then explained a small deception using mirrors and heat signatures, simple things that could trick distant sensors into reading movement where there was none. It was not a grand strategy. It was human cunning applied to the tools they had. The maneuver worked. The enemy aimed at what they thought was a concentrated retreat and burned energy on a false front. In the confusion, human squads slipped into hidden ravines and set ambushes. They used short-range weapons to disable the enemy's forward units and fed false data into the attacker's sensors. Machines that expected clean, predictable targets found themselves facing the messy, unpredictable reality of human fighters who used smoke, shadow, and stubborn courage. The aliens were advanced and logical in their approach, built to suppress order with overwhelming force. They did not expect the kind of creative improvisation that rose when people refused to quit. Word of the success at the Badlands traveled fast. It reached tents and trenches and the crowded corridors of the palace. It reached mothers who breathed a small, quick breath and then returned to their work. It reached men on watch, who for a moment felt lighter and kept staring at the horizon with a different kind of hard, shining hope. Success was not clean or absolute. There were losses. There were tanks burned out and soldiers who would not walk again. But for people who had been told to expect only retreat, the victory tasted like something forbidden and bright. Alara did not celebrate. There was no time. She moved from one point to another, answering questions and listening to concerns. She saw fear in the eyes of engineers who doubted whether the city's defenses would hold. She shook hands with medics who had no illusions about the blood they would see. She shared a quiet joke with a young radio operator who thought his voice would fail him in the day's noise. Her presence made practical things happen. Morale rallied. A tired squad found new strength. An old commander admitted a plan might be improved. These were small, human ripples that added up. As dusk fell, the sky remained streaked with light from distant blasts. The city was lit by fires and emergency flares. Alara stood on a low hill overlooking the damage and watched smoke curl into the air. Her uniform was spattered with ash. Her hair was pulled back stubbornly from her face. She felt neither pride nor shame, only a steady awareness of what the next day might bring. Around her, people slept in shifts, keeping watch. She sat down on a cooling stone and listened to the soft noises of a city that would not be broken by one day of war. In those quiet moments, she allowed herself a thought she would not voice. Fear had a shape, and it could be met. The army had held. The enemy had been surprised by human unpredictability and stubborn heart, but the armada in orbit was still there. The war was not over. She had not chosen safety. She had chosen a position of influence and risk. If she had to make more choices like this, she would. For now, victory in one valley had become a small, stubborn light. She thought of the teacher who had once spoken of steady lamps in storms. Tonight, the lamps were burning, and people who had been ready to flee a little less quickly, because a princess had chosen to stand. The morning after the first clash began quietly, almost as if the world was holding its breath. Smoke from yesterday's fires hung low in the valleys, curling around jagged rocks and broken buildings like fingers searching for something lost. Soldiers moved carefully, stepping over debris, checking weapons, and whispering reports to one another. The air smelled of burned metal and dust, but also of determination. The people of Urandor had seen fear. They had felt it. But they had also seen courage take shape, led by the princess who refused to leave. Princess Alara did not rest. She rose before dawn, brushing the ash from her uniform and tightening the straps of her boots. The early light cast long shadows across the training grounds where soldiers had been practicing maneuvers even in the middle of a siege. She walked among them, observing quietly, her eyes catching small details. A misaligned formation, a weapon that needed repair, a soldier's exhaustion that could turn into hesitation in the heat of battle. She did not speak at first. She simply moved, listening, watching, noticing what needed attention. Her presence alone seemed to steady the soldiers, as if they knew she would not ask them to do anything she herself would not attempt. A small group of officers approached her with reports. Captain Rin, still missing his left arm, moved with practiced precision despite his injury. "Highness, we've scouted the canyon edges," he said, handing her a thin data pad. "The enemy is regrouping. They have heavy walkers, slower than before but stronger. Their sensors are recalibrated. We may need to adjust our positions." Alara studied the pad carefully, her eyes scanning the topographical maps and the readings. "What if we use the narrow ridges to our advantage?" she asked. "They cannot bring those walkers close together in that terrain without risking collapse. We can funnel them and divide their units." She did not speak with authority to command them. She spoke with curiosity, as if inviting them to see a possibility they might have overlooked. Verk, standing behind the captain, raised an eyebrow. "It is risky. The ridges are narrow. One misstep and we lose men, equipment, everything." Alara nodded. "I understand the risk, but our strength is not only in our weapons. It is in how we move, how we think, how we adapt faster than they can. We must fight smart, not only hard." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She had studied these maps, the land, and the enemy's behavior. Humans had always been adaptable. It was their advantage, and she intended to make sure it counted. The troops moved into position by mid-morning. Alara went with them, not staying in the command tent as some expected. She climbed the rocky slopes alongside the soldiers, helping to guide scouts and positioning small squads to cover key points. The soldiers began to talk among themselves, whispers of admiration and disbelief passing through ranks. A princess on the front lines was unusual, almost unheard of. But seeing her here, walking among them, made them feel that survival was possible, not just because of strategy, but because of courage shared by every human heart. The first wave of alien walkers came over the horizon as the sun reached its height. They moved in strict formation, massive machines that carried weapons designed to crush anything in their path. Their sensors scanned relentlessly, and the enemy troops advanced with precision. The humans held their positions, hidden among rocks and ridges, waiting for the right moment. Alara signaled to Captain Rin. When they reached the first choke point, open fire in sequence, not all at once. "We want to create confusion, not just destruction." She paused, looking over the ridges. "We have prepared traps. The dust and narrow paths will do the rest. Remember, stay calm and move only when necessary. Use their speed against them." The humans' first shots were small, calculated bursts that struck the edges of the enemy units. Machines faltered, sensors misread the movements, and the soldiers advanced uncertainly. Then, at the right moment, the humans detonated small explosive charges hidden along the narrow paths. Rocks fell, blocking paths, funneling the enemy into pockets where squads waited. The walkers stumbled, their size and weight becoming disadvantages rather than advantages. The humans moved with precision, shooting from hidden spots, repositioning, and never staying in one place too long. Alara moved along the lines, giving encouragement and adjusting positions where needed. She was not afraid, though the enemy fire screamed overhead. Bullets and laser pulses carved paths through rocks, and the ground shook with the impact of massive weapons. Soldiers fell and rose again, guided by the presence of the princess who refused to leave. Some whispered prayers, others whispered hope. All of them moved faster, thought faster, because someone important had chosen to share their danger. The battle lasted through the afternoon. Hours felt like days as the humans and aliens fought for control over the narrow passes. By evening, the first major victory was claimed. The enemy had been forced to retreat, damaged and disorganized. Humans held the ridge lines, and small teams moved to secure fallen equipment for reuse. Alara did not celebrate. She stood silently, surveying the battlefield. Smoke rose from broken machines, and soldiers tended to their wounded. The princess spoke briefly to medics and engineers, checking that resources were allocated efficiently. Every life mattered, and she treated them as if they were all equally important. That evening, she walked to a small outcrop overlooking the horizon. The city of Lyrian was quiet in the distance, its lights dimmed by the smoke and the damage from the initial attacks. Alara's mind worked not on fear or exhaustion, but on what came next. The enemy would regroup. Their advanced technology and numbers could not be ignored, yet humans had something the aliens could not calculate: creativity, courage, and the ability to inspire each other to do more than expected. General Verk joined her, standing silently at first. "They are stronger than we anticipated," he said. His voice carried concern but not despair. "We have won today, but tomorrow," Alara turned to him. "Tomorrow we adapt again. That is what humans do. That is what makes us unpredictable. Do you see the line of soldiers? Every one of them knows what they are fighting for. They believe in what we can do. That counts more than any machine." Verk's eyes softened. He knew she was right. Machines could be repaired, replaced, or recalculated. But morale, courage, and determination were harder to destroy. Seeing the princess stand where she did, not hiding in safety but sharing the risk, had changed the soldiers' hearts. Night came, bringing with it the sounds of recovery. Engineers worked to repair weapons and vehicles. Medics treated the injured, moving silently through the lines. Alara visited each tent, checking on the wounded personally. She asked questions about their families, their fears, their hopes. She spoke with a warmth that seemed almost at odds with the battle outside, but soldiers felt it. They felt that someone who had power had chosen to care, not just command. Even in her brief moments alone, Alara did not rest fully. She studied maps and reports, considering every possibility. How could the humans move faster? How could they anticipate the enemy's next strike? She plotted contingencies, noting which squads could be moved to assist without exposing weaknesses. Her mind never paused, always turning, always seeking the advantage hidden in the simplest human action. The night grew cold, and the stars were sharp points over the ruined ridges. Alara stood again at the outcrop, listening to the wind, feeling it like the pulse of the land. The people of Urindor had begun to see that war was not just about machines or power. It was about heart. And in that heart, a single choice, the choice to stay rather than flee, could change the course of the battle. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Alara prepared the soldiers for the next wave. The enemy would return, stronger and smarter. The princess would be there, not hidden in safety, but among them. And in that presence, every human who fought would know they were not alone. They would move, think, and fight as one. By mid-morning, the horizon showed signs of movement. Alien ships emerged, silhouettes against the sun, larger than before, their engines humming with power and purpose. Yet the humans were ready. Alara moved along the lines, her voice calm but firm. "Stay focused. Watch for patterns. Use the terrain. Trust each other." Trust yourself. When the first shots rang out again, they were different. Soldiers moved with coordination born of hope and courage. Traps were set, fire was directed, and every human action counted in the unpredictable flow of battle. The aliens had expected a retreat. They had expected fear. Instead, they faced the unwavering determination of a people led by a princess who refused evacuation, who refused to be hidden while others fought. By the end of the second day, small victories had piled up. Human ingenuity and courage had disrupted the enemy's plans, forcing them to reassess. Soldiers and commanders alike began to whisper a truth that no report could fully capture. The presence of the princess had changed the way they fought. They were no longer just defending a planet. They were defending a symbol, a promise, a shared determination that burned brighter than any weapon. Princess Alara remained among them, always observing, always guiding, never asking for praise, never seeking glory. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew that courage could grow like fire in dry grass, and she had lit that flame. And with it, the humans of Erendor would not only survive, they would fight in ways that even the most advanced machines could not predict. The enemy would learn, sooner or later, that humans were not just flesh and bone. They were clever, adaptable, and driven by something no machine could measure: the unbreakable spirit of a people, and the example set by one young princess who refused to leave. The sky over Erendor was bruised and dark, streaked with smoke from battles that had raged for days. The alien armada had returned, larger and more organized than before, their machines moving with calculated precision. The humans knew that the final test of their courage and skill was coming. Every soldier, medic, engineer, and scout felt the weight of the moment. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see who would stand and who would fall. Princess Alara stood on the ridge, looking out at the advancing forces. She did not feel fear. She felt resolve. She knew the battle would be hard, but she also knew that humans had a strength no machine could predict: creativity, courage, and an unbreakable will. Her mind moved quickly, reviewing every detail from the previous encounters. Every skirmish, every failed tactic, every small victory had taught her something. She adjusted positions, moved squads to cover new blind spots, and coordinated with engineers to set traps along the narrow passes. The soldiers followed her instructions, not because they had to, but because they trusted her. Seeing their leader among them, sharing their danger, had changed them. They were no longer just fighters. They were a force united by determination and purpose. As the first wave of alien walkers moved into the valleys, the humans waited in silence. The aliens expected the same mistakes, the same hesitation, the same predictable defense they had faced before. They would find none of it. Alara had planned every detail, but she had also left room for flexibility, for human improvisation. Soldiers moved like shadows along the ridges, firing from hidden positions, then disappearing before the enemy could respond. Explosives hidden in narrow paths tumbled rocks down, breaking machines apart and creating new choke points. Alara moved among them, her eyes sharp, her voice calm but commanding. She noticed when a squad faltered, stepping in with encouragement and a small adjustment to their formation. She observed when a medic struggled to carry a wounded soldier, lending her strength without hesitation. Every action she took, no matter how small, rippled through the lines, inspiring others to act with the same courage. Hours passed like minutes. The battle was chaotic, with blasts shaking the ground and smoke hiding movements. Yet the humans held, their ingenuity and determination turning what could have been a massacre into a series of calculated strikes. Alara had taught them to think beyond the machines, to use the terrain, to anticipate the enemy's logic and then break it. They were unpredictable, and unpredictability became their weapon. At one critical point, a massive walker broke through the human front line, heading toward the city. Soldiers tried to contain it, but its size and firepower were overwhelming. Alara saw the danger and acted immediately. She directed a small team to flank the machine, using narrow crevices to approach undetected. With precise coordination, they disabled its engines and weapon systems, turning what could have been disaster into victory. The soldiers watching learned quickly risk, when guided by strategy and courage, could lead to extraordinary results. As the day wore on, the alien forces began to falter. Their formations broke under constant harassment, their advanced machines were damaged, and their commanders struggled to adapt to the humans' clever tactics. Alara noticed the change in their movements, the hesitation, the confusion, the uncertainty. She pushed forward, coordinating squads to exploit every weakness. Every success built momentum, and the humans moved with confidence and unity. By evening, the battlefield was a mix of smoke, fire, and the sounds of repair and preparation. Soldiers carried supplies, medics treated the wounded, and engineers worked tirelessly to restore damaged equipment. Alara walked among them, checking on each group, offering encouragement and guidance. She spoke to the young soldiers, reminding them that their efforts mattered. She reassured the wounded, telling them that their courage had saved lives and inspired hope. She inspired not through grand speeches, but through presence, action, and understanding. From a high ridge, she watched the alien retreat begin. The advanced machines pulled back, some destroyed, others damaged. The humans had held their ground, not by superior technology, but by courage, ingenuity, and leadership. Alara's decision to stay to fight alongside them had turned the tide. The enemy would return, but they would face a people who had learned to trust themselves, who had seen the example of bravery and determination, and who were now capable of extraordinary action. As the smoke cleared, Alara reflected on the battle. She thought of the soldiers who had stood firm, the medics who had worked tirelessly, the engineers who had turned broken machines into tools of survival. She thought of the citizens who had endured fear without faltering, and she understood the power of human spirit. Leadership was not about staying safe. It was about sharing risk, inspiring courage, and showing that even in the darkest moments, hope could exist. Word of the battle spread quickly throughout the planet. Citizens celebrated the victories quietly, tending to the wounded, repairing what had been broken, and preparing for the challenges yet to come. They spoke of the princess who refused evacuation, who chose to stand among them, and who showed that courage could change the course of events. The soldiers carried the lessons they had learned into future battles, and the enemy would soon discover that humans were not easily defeated. Alara did not seek praise or recognition. She understood that victory was temporary, that the war was far from over. Yet she also knew that the true victory was the spirit of the people, the unity forged in the heat of battle, and the courage that had been inspired by her presence. She had chosen not to hide, and in doing so she had given her people more than a tactical advantage. She had given them hope, determination, and belief in themselves. The night fell quietly over the battlefield. Fires burned low, and the city of Lyrian glimmered in the distance. Soldiers rested in shifts, medics moved quietly through the lines, and engineers repaired what could be saved. Alara stood once more on the ridge, watching the stars pierce the dark sky. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, and new dangers. But she also knew that humans had discovered something powerful. When they stood together, led by courage and guided by ingenuity, they could face any threat. Her thoughts turned to the future. The enemy would return, but so would human resilience. The victories of the day were small, but they were seeds for greater triumphs. Alara reflected on the lesson she had learned herself. True leadership was not about safety or comfort, but about inspiring courage, taking risks for the greater good, and showing others what was possible when fear was faced and not followed. She walked back to the command tent as the first cold winds of night swept through the valley. Soldiers greeted her with nods, some tired, some bruised, but all standing with a renewed sense of purpose. She spoke briefly, offering words of encouragement and guidance for the next steps. Every word mattered, every action inspired. She had become a living example of the principles she had always believed. Courage, ingenuity, and unyielding determination could change the course of events. As the night deepened, Alara allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. She thought of the small victories, the soldiers she had inspired, and the people who had survived because they had chosen to stand rather than flee. She felt neither pride nor arrogance, only a calm understanding that her choice to remain, to share the danger with her people, had made a difference. The alien armada would return, but when it did, it would face a people transformed. Humans had proven that courage could be as powerful as any weapon, that ingenuity could defeat strength, and that unity could turn fear into action. Alara had lit the spark, and now it burned bright in every heart on the planet. The first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, softening the scars of the battlefield. Soldiers prepared for another day, medics tended to their duties, and engineers continued their repairs. The city of Lyrian stirred quietly, as people began to believe that survival was possible, that the future could be shaped not just by chance, but by courage, determination, and leadership. Princess Alara stood one last time on the ridge, looking at the horizon, her eyes sharp and clear. She had chosen not to evacuate, and in doing so, she had changed the battle. The soldiers had learned from her example, the citizens had found hope, and the enemy had discovered that humans were unpredictable, resourceful, and brave. She understood that the war was far from over, but she also knew that humanity had found its strength in the heart of struggle, and that strength would guide them in every challenge yet to come. And so, as the planet of Urindor prepared for whatever came next, the people stood taller, fought harder, and believed more deeply than ever before. They had faced the storm, and they had endured. They had been led by courage, and that courage would continue to light the way in the days to come. The human spirit had been tested, and it had prevailed. The human princess refused evacuation. Her decision changed the battle.